It's been a joy to work with you and with Robert as part of the worship service on Sunday mornings. Thank you so much for your music. So 45 years ago this month, in an unair-conditioned building, the congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Lexington, Kentucky, held a special Friday evening service of worship, the purpose of which was to ordain me to the Unitarian Universalist ministry. They didn't know what this was. I had to explain it all to them before they did it. I had already been serving the church for 5 months, but the act of ordination did serve as a public and official confirmation of my vocation. Now, as a child, I did not know that I would become a minister. My first paying job was in the summer of 1965 when I was 14. I worked in a summer work camp organized by Maricopa County in Arizona. About 60 of us learned how to mix concrete, which we poured into wooden molds, which made foundations to hold the targets at the county shooting range. I remember our supervisor would shout to the shooters, "Hold your fire." And with summer temperatures over 100 degrees, we would take our concrete blocks out onto the desert firing range, dig the holes, make sure that we place them in the correct position, so that the wooden posts could fit into the holes in the concrete blocks and the targets would fit properly. Then we walked back to the firing line. We walked back and we watched people shoot their rifles at the targets that we had completed. We learned from everything we do. And from this experience, I learned how to mix cement and also that human beings are potentially very dangerous. My second paying job was a dishwasher at a Unitarian Universalist summer camp in Southern California, a place called Divinaville Pines, named after the Universalist minister, George Divinaville. I worked there as a dishwasher for the entire summer, and I learned many things about sanitation and cleanliness, and a little, as the Unitarians would come and go about marijuana. After that, I worked as a salesperson during Christmas at the National Shirt Shop, a men's clothing store in a shopping mall. In college, I had more jobs, washing dishes in restaurants. One summer, I was a camp counselor in a Quaker camp in North Carolina. Another year, I worked as a sales clerk in a gift shop in a national park in California. My senior year of college, I worked as an assistant carpenter at the university carpenter shop, and I learned a lot about carpentry from those guys. I had my own truck with authority to drive it on the university sidewalks, which gave me a sense of power over all the other poor students who had to walk to class. I had a truck. I could just, as long as I didn't hit anybody, I could go wherever I wanted. In 1973, I graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in political science. Now, there are no jobs in political science. I had no idea how I was going to make a living. And I knew that I had a problem. I had and still have a crippling learning disability. I cannot remember the spelling of words. When the part of a brain's memory cells involving spelling does not work, there are many jobs that are not possible. Indeed, I needed to be able to spell, even to be able to fill out an application form to apply for most jobs. One of my elementary school teachers, looking at my spelling when I was a child, she led me to the classroom window and she pointed to an irrigation ditch and told me I would dig ditches for a living. And I was afraid she was right. She was trying to motivate me to study harder, but nothing helped. The brain cells just weren't there for some reason. Later, computers with spell checkers would be invented, but I did not know that was going to happen. In the early 1970s, my learning disability, my form of spelling dyslexia, meant that I was not qualified for most jobs. Well, that summer after college, I lived at home and I worked during the day in a warehouse that stored furniture for a bank. In the evening, my father would suggest possible careers for me. He was worried about whether or not I would actually ever leave home. Most of the time, I would say, no, Dad, there's no way I could do that. It was discouraging for him and scary for me. I was 22, a college grad, living at home, working in a warehouse at minimum wage. But one evening, he suggested that I become a minister. And I did not immediately say no. My father noticed that. I was thinking to myself, hey, ministers just talk. And I can talk. So maybe this is a career where I could work without anybody knowing that I don't know how to spell. Perhaps I could be a minister by talking to people and hide from all of you my spelling dyslexia. And I had greatly appreciated the work of both the minister of the Phoenix Unitarian Universalist Church and the director of religious education in that church. I appreciated the way the minister had conducted the memorial service for my mother after she died. I was grateful for the fact that he had supported me when I went before the draft board to ask to be recognized as a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War. I liked to listen to his sermons. He talked about psychology, philosophy, culture, as well as religion, and I always learned from what he said. After my mother died, the religious education director was my advisor, a close support in all things. When I worked in New England as an apple picker, I had seen a Unitarian church in Ashby, Massachusetts. It was a classic white building constructed in 1809. The church had 20 members. They paid their minister $4,000 a year. This was in the 1970s. And they gave him a lovely parsonage in which to live. As a single 22-year-old, that seemed to me to be enough. Perhaps I thought, in spite of the fact that I could not spell, I could serve a small church in New England, live in their parsonage, and preach in their lovely New England church. Well, the next day, my dad called the minister of the church, Ray Manker, and he said that he thought I had the right qualifications to study for the ministry. And then my father called me at work at the warehouse and told me that Ray thought I could be a minister. So in my case, it was a parent, my father, who moved me in the direction of becoming a minister. Unconsciously, I also carried inside me my Mennonite mother's belief in the importance of religious community. This led her to the Unitarian Church. And it was my hope that in my ministry, I could hide my disability. So I applied and I was accepted by Starr King School for Religious Leadership in Berkeley, California, named after an important 19th century Unitarian and actually Unitarian and Universalist minister, Thomas Starr King. The best part of my education, my graduate education, were the internships I did, 2 in churches and 1 as a hospital chaplain. Starting in 1952, the school was one of the first seminaries of any denomination to require students to do at least 1 student internship in a church, supervised by an experienced minister. It was also one of the first seminaries to require students to do an internship as a chaplain or in a hospital or in a prison. While other graduate schools stressed academic preparation, I was sent to a congregation in this very dismal place called Santa Barbara, California, where under supervision, I preached, I officiated. I was 24 years old and I officiated 27 weddings and participated in the life of the church. So I know lots of internships still today do not pay very much money. The Santa Barbara people gave me a place to stay and $50 a month. But my advice to young people, internships, they're a very useful way to discover what sort of life work you would like. Well, I love the 3 years in graduate school. Eventually, however, I had to actually look for a position as a minister. And my first interview, the first church that was willing to fly me in and spend the weekend with me and interview me for their position, was the UU Church in State College, Pennsylvania. I thought it would be wonderful to live in Pennsylvania. So I did my best in the interview, but I lost out to an excellent young woman minister, Barty Harmony, who I later became good friends with. I kept interviewing, and eventually I was called to serve the Unitarian Universalist Church in Lexington, Kentucky. Then I quickly discovered that I could not meet every expectation. As a minister, I am far from perfect. I do not please everyone. People told me they would like me to be more intellectual or less intellectual, to preach more about spirituality or less about spirituality. They wanted more social action from the pulpit, or they wanted less social action. Some said, we just want a lecture and a discussion on Sunday morning with no music and no readings and no prayers, while others hoped that I would just skip the sermon completely, put the chairs in a circle, and lead the congregation in interpretive dance. Well, some days after listening to these conversations, I would have a fantasy of doing something else. I remember driving on a toll road one day, going along and stopping and handing my quarters to the attendant and thinking, that person doesn't have to write a sermon every week. Well, like all professions, the ministry changed over 45 years. With the purchase of my first personal computer in 1982, the K Pro 2. Anybody else have a K Pro? Very early on. Andy K was a Unitarian in San Diego, by the way. With that, my spelling disability became less of a problem. When a church administrator in Bethesda, where I eventually ended up, when that administrator first connected my computer to the World Wide Web back in 1995, I said, what do I need that for? Of course, I soon became dependent on the internet for both communication and for research. In 2007, when the church I was serving in Bethesda decided to install a screen behind the pulpit, then I had to learn new skills. The church consultant said that ministers of the 20th century were wordsmiths, experts in writing and words, while the minister of the 21st century, he said, would be an image smith, expert in images on the screen. Last August, when I arrived here, I had to learn about something called Google Docs. And now my adult children tell me that the artificial intelligence program will make a dramatic changes in the ministry. My adult children say, I can ask Chat GPT to write me an 1,800-word Unitarian Universalist sermon about meditation or any subject I pick, and the machine will write one, and it'll be grammatically correct and very good. I find this scary. The ancient profession is evolving and changing. One of my colleagues used to call ministry the second oldest profession. Think about what the first one was. Looking back, I am grateful for all the experiences I've had. In my role as a minister, I have visited prisons. I have marched in demonstrations. I have written letters. I have supported political leaders. I have appeared on radio and on television. I have had so many experiences. I was once interviewed on radio in Romania about Unitarianism. I've discovered that every person, all of you, if I can get you to tell me your story, that you are very interesting, every one of you. In 1981, one of my New Bedford members told me about his experiences as a soldier in France in 1918. In 1985, one of my Evanston members told me that on her honeymoon, her name was Forrestal. She came from a very prominent New England wealthy family. That on her honeymoon in 1919, she and her new husband visited Woodrow Wilson in the White House to talk about the location of the League of Nations in Virginia, in Switzerland, in Geneva. In Bethesda, a woman whose father was Archibald MacLeish, the poet, told me stories about growing up in Paris in the 1920s with Hemingway and Fitzgerald visitors to their apartment. She said Hemingway was very scary, especially after he had too much to drink. And one day, her father took Fitzgerald out in the backyard and slugged him because he was so annoying. And she said that as a gift, Picasso painted a mural on the wall of the MacLeish apartment in Paris. I said, well, Mimi, what happened to that? You know, his stuff sells for hundreds of millions of dollars. She said after they moved back to America, the next tenants painted over the mural. Another of my members had a father who was director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons in the 1930s under Roosevelt. And she would describe as a young person having dinner at the White House with the Roosevelts. She said Eleanor Roosevelt was a wonderful host. She would drive up to the guardhouse, she would give her name and was instructed to park in the circular driveway. In Edinburgh, I became friends with a Unitarian who had been a Spitfire pilot in the Battle of Britain in 1940. In Bethesda, I met Secretary of Defense William Perry. He spoke at our 2 Sunday services in 1996. In Sarasota, our head usher, the woman who organized the ushers on Sunday, had been the host of the Today Show in 1960 and 1961 with John Chancellor. I love to hear your stories. All of you have great, interesting stories. During my ministry, I've been lucky to serve as a guest minister in Adelaide, Australia, in Auckland, New Zealand, and in Edinburgh, Scotland. I've been privileged to travel to Transylvania, in Romania, 5 times and speak on Sunday in Unitarian churches during those visits. I have been blessed to be with people, and this is one of the things I think ministers appreciate most as they develop their careers. I have been blessed to be with people at some of the most important moments of their lives, to officiate at their weddings, to dedicate their babies, to conduct their memorial services. I officiated at one wedding on a sailboat in San Francisco Bay, and I conducted funerals at Arlington National Cemetery. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 says, "We are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses." That is to say, we are surrounded by the work that was done by people who came before us, and by our memories of them, the people who came before us, who built this lovely sanctuary. My own cloud of witnesses includes my father, my mother, my minister of religious education, and many others who helped and guided me on my way. We are each part of what has come before and part of what will come after us. Well, would I do it again? Oh, yes, I would. Vocational counselors would say that I was over-determined to become a minister. I grew up in a church. I was president of the high school youth group. I served on the church board when I was 18 in Phoenix. And even on those Saturday nights, when in desperation, I struggled to finish a sermon. Sometimes it was Sunday mornings. I have always known in the back of my mind that I could not evade the destiny which called me to this profession. So 45 years ago, on June 16th, 1978, the congregation in Kentucky ordained me. That evening, I promised to speak the truth in freedom, in love, and then I added, with humor, setting forth by my example the principles of our faith. Of course, I had no idea back then, I was 26 years old, no idea that 45 years later, I would be in Media, Pennsylvania. I am so glad to have spent a year with so many lovely people, and I wish you well. As for me, I think I am too old for paragliding. However, on July 3rd, I will fly in an airplane with my partner, Leslie, to Calgary to explore the Canadian Rockies for several weeks. If that goes well, we hope to take other trips before we get too old to travel. But I know wherever I am, I will occasionally think of all of you and this lovely church. Thank you. Let's sing the closing hymn.